Is this the right window? This is not the right window. Okay, so I've got a flow chart, and then I have, because I cheated just a tiny bit, so I would have all of the unit documents handy. In this case, I only have the unit 6 one open because I knew what the prompt was. But I would have these, you know, one place in my iPad where I could quickly look at them. I would have the threading documents. I have the state building one handy, and then I have my question, and then I've got a blank doc that I'll type everything into. So, okay, so the first thing I need to do then is I need to find my prompt. Okay, evaluate the extent to which indigenous peoples' reactions to state expansion differed during the period 1750 to 1900. Okay, so I know that that is going to be 1750 to 1900, so that's period 3, which means it's either unit 5 or 6, and since it's state expansion, I know that's unit 6. So I am going to want to pop over here and scroll through here to find the topic that I'm looking for. It is 1750 to 1900. It's political. What regions or groups? Well, it doesn't really have regions or groups. It's just everywhere, so that doesn't narrow. And then if I'm looking for a historical thinking skill on this one, I'm probably going to go causation or comparison, because it's a reaction, which is an effect. On the other hand, it does say, it is asking me to show how they differ. Now, you know, you can go with a single skill, and you're free to pick whatever skill you want, because they all score the same. What's key is just to kind of pick one and have that in the back of your mind. So I know I'm looking at either causation or comparison. That's okay, right? You do not have to pick a single one for the thing. All right, so I know then it's unit 6 is imperialism part 2, it's state building, and in this case, if I'm really looking at what the big ideas are going to be for this, it's accumulation of power, because it says state expansion. Okay, so I'm gonna, if I'm looking for some other stuff to talk about from the political realm, this might be, you know, depending on what the documents say, right? This might give me a little bit, but it's definitely expansion. Okay, connections. So this gives me independence movements in unit 5, industrialization in unit 5, and maritime empires in unit 4. So when I'm thinking about contextualization, which of those seems like the strongest idea to me? Well, if it's indigenous responses, maybe it's independence movements from unit 5, and looking at how, well, there's two things, right? I know that the indigenous people may be trying to mimic the attempts at independence that were in unit 5. As well, I know that the people in 1750 to 1900 who were affected, the Europeans went there because of the groups that declared independence during unit 5. Okay, so that's a strong one for both contextualization, I could go as far back as maritime empires to talk about a continuity of European colonialism or whatever, but I feel like that independence movement's pretty great. When I look at specific events and people, again, not having seen the documents yet, but just kind of introducing myself very quickly, I see indigenous resistance movements right here. Okay, so hey, if some of these people aren't mentioned in the documents, you know, that is my outside evidence just waiting for me right there, right? And so I'm going to definitely keep that available. And if I see any of these, whichever, like, personally, I feel like I know the most about Sepoys and the Ghost Ants, so I hope that one of those two shows up, or I'm sorry, does not show up in the documents, because those are the two I feel the most comfortable talking about as external evidence. If one of these if both of them are in the documents, then I'm going to have to decide whether to even do outside evidence, or I'm going to just make up something. So we'll see. We'll see how that goes. Okay, so I've set myself up. I know what I want. Okay, so this is indigenous responses to European state expansion. And I know it's causation or comparison. Context may want it being Unit 5 independence movements, or Unit 4 maritime empires. Okay, so now I'm ready to start looking at the documents. Okay, so document 1. The source is the Ashanti Leader, a response to British offer of protectorate status, West Africa, 1891. So right off the bat, you know, I know this is an African leader talking to the British. And let's see if it's a hostile response. Let's see what kind of response we get here. The suggestion that Ashanti in its present state should come and enjoy the protection of Her Majesty the Queen of England and Empress of India is a matter of very serious consideration. I'm pleased to announce that we have arrived at the conclusion that my kingdom of Ashanti will never commit itself to any such policy. Ashanti must remain as of old and at the same time remain friendly with all white men. What I love about this response already, and you can just kind of imagine this yourself, is when she says, I am pleased to announce that we have arrived at the conclusion that is going to piss off the British. I just feel like there's a certain amount of satisfaction there. And I definitely want to, if I'm going to source, if this comes up as one that I might source, I am definitely going to talk about how she's being extremely formal when she, or he knows that, that it's going to make the white men angry. It's very amusing to see that line in there. So, okay, so what evidence? So in this case, for document 1, it's the Ashanti. They say no, but very politely, remain independent, but friendly. Okay, and then maybe source. All right. Document 2. The Tongauk Proclamation to Soldiers and Civilians, 1894. Tongauk was a Korean Neo-Confucian movement beginning in 1860 that called for a return to traditional Eastern learning and opposed foreign domination of the Korean state. So what do I know from the source already? I'm going to assume this is going to be a big fat no, and they're going to tell them, you know, to go take their European stuff somewhere else. So let's see. We, the Tongauk believers, had to raise the righteous army to exterminate the Japanese enemy, check the process of Western enlightenment, restore tranquility to the royal court, and secure peace for our nation. Yet, wherever the righteous army appears on the scene, the state's soldiers and military officers ignore traditional moral learning. Although we may differ in our religious faith, we are one in anti-Japanese and anti-Chinese sentiment. These words are addressed to you in order to dispel suspicion and to appeal to your patriotism. Okay. So this one, they're not actually talking to Europeans. They're talking to other Koreans, and it seems like to me what their argument to the soldiers is that hey, look, we are all together here against the Japanese and the Chinese, who we've been sandwiched between forever, and we are afraid that things are going bad, that it's the soldiers and military officers ignore traditional moral learning. And so this is an interesting one. We had to raise the righteous army to exterminate the Japanese enemy and do all this stuff, and yet the army, okay, so I think what they're kind of saying here is that they did raise the army to do this stuff, and it appears as though things have been kind of bad as a result of that. So they kind of regret raising an army to fight against Japan and the Europeans, But remember, we had to do it. Let's get back to good traditional learning / behavior is the sense I get from this. So yeah, don't worry about how bad the Army is. We had to do it. So hey, stay on our side because this is what we had to do. Don't love that, but we'll see how it fits in. All right, document 3, Ethiopian painting of the Battle of Adwa, in which the Ethiopians were victorious over Italian troops. Hey, this looks familiar. I would love it if an image we actually looked at in class showed up on the AP exam. I would feel like such a decent teacher if that happened. Okay, so we've got this battle, and so here I definitely want to. I wish it would let me. Okay. So yeah, I'm going to zoom in a little bit here because this is definitely one where I want to see what details I can see. Okay, and so this is Ethiopia. These are the Italians. A little darker skin, a little lighter skin, and of course there's our boy the Jesus up here in the top of the painting. We got the book, which can only be one book. And so again, like this is background knowledge because I know this this source. If I'm just looking here, I may be focusing more on just the simple fact here that they fought and the Ethiopians won. So the easy thing here is that Ethiopia fought for their independence. Okay, so far we've gotten a lot of resistance, which kind of tells me, I mean, that's at least one thing I can say off the bat is probably going to be a category. And so if they're all resistance, I'm going to have to look a little bit more carefully and see how else I can group them. Because at least so far the Ashanti didn't like seem, at least in that document, to fight the Europeans, but the Koreans definitely did. The Ethiopians definitely did. All right, document 4, letter from Queen Liliuokalani to the U.S. December 1898. She's the queen of the Hawaiian Islands. Okay, so I, named heir apparent, blah, blah, proclaimed queen, do hereby earnestly and respectfully protest against the assertion of ownership by the U.S. of the so-called Hawaiian Crown Islands, amounting to about 1 million acres, and which are my property. And I especially protest against such assertion of ownership as a taking of property without due process of law, without just or other compensation. Therefore, supplanting my protest of June 17, 1897, I call upon the President of the National Legislature and the people of the United States to do justice in this matter and to restore to me this property, the enjoyment of which is being withheld from me by your government under what must be a misapprehension of my right and title. Okay, so this is really similar to document 1. She's basically saying, respectfully, I think you people are idiots. What must be a misapprehension of my right and title. You just must not understand that these are my islands, not your islands. And so this is Hawaii. Queen sends a protest letter to U.S. Officials. Misapprehension about who owns the Hawaiian Islands. So, okay. So we kind of have peaceful resistance, righteous army fought. We've got fought, and this seems to be again peaceful resistance. So see how like groups should start to show themselves, right? Like the College Board didn't accidentally assign the documents that you're going to get. You know, they picked very purposefully which documents are going to show up on your list. The idea being that if you had done the research yourself, these would be the documents you would choose to use when you were writing a paper about the topic. And so, yeah, so far I seem to have two categories shaping up pretty well. And then we go to document 5. And I'm already relieved when I see who this document's from, because India and continental US didn't show up in either place. So both of my sources of potential outside evidence are still in play as outside evidence. All right, so this is Radin Ajeng Kartini, a Javanese aristocrat and pioneer in education for women during the Dutch colonial period. Letters of a Javanese Princess, 1901. There are many, yes, very many Dutch government officials who allow the native rulers to kiss their feet and their knees. Dutch government controlled most of the islands, but some local rulers had been allowed to administer. So, okay, indirect rule, cool, whatever. Kissing the foot is the highest token of respect that we Javanese can show to our parents or elderly blood relatives and to our own rulers. We do not find it pleasant to do this for strangers. No, the European makes himself ridiculous in our eyes whenever he demands from us those tokens of respect to which our own rulers alone have the right. In many subtle ways, they make us feel their dislike. I am a European, you are a Javanese, they seem to say, or I am the master, you the governed. Not once, but many times they speak to us in broken Malay, although they know very well that we understand the Dutch language. Okay. Well, so this one's definitely different. Well, obviously, if I'm going to have to put in the two categories that we have so far, it's definitely going in into peaceful resistance. But the evidence that I can actually use here don't love it. Well, I mean, let's see, Japanese. Okay, yeah. So, you know, if there's one of the 5 documents that I don't feel super great about, I mean, it's implied that they're not gonna, there's no armed resistance here. And this, unlike the others, it doesn't show us a direct, it doesn't seem to directly address the prompt. So there's something here that, man, it may go along well with the Hawaii thing when it's talking about the way that Europeans just didn't respect any previous tradition or the practices of the people ahead of time, which allowed them to justify colonial rule. So that may be the angle that I go after it. European. Okay. All right. So I've gone through my documents. So group 1 is going to be this is going to be violent reaction, which is going to be docs 2 and 3. And if I'm looking for evidence beyond the documents on this one, this is, I'll probably go Sepoy mutiny on this one. Group 2, this is peaceful or gosh. So see. And then if, why not? Let's do the ghost dance. It'll be, you know, I mean, there's a huge cultural misunderstanding piece to the ghost dance with regards to the white American reaction to it. So I think I can make that work. Okay. So, and then I know kind of what my contextualization is going to be. I'm going to talk about U.S. Haitian Latin American independence caused Europeans to look to Africa, Asia. The connection is, yeah, okay. Okay, so are there any questions before I start actual writing? Are there any other observations you guys have about what we've got in these documents? What are you seeing something that I'm not seeing? Do you have any questions so far?
I have a question for the contextualization.
Sure.
Can we also talk about the Industrial Revolution and how this led to imperialism and like the different responses they had to
Totally. Yeah, you absolutely could. The reason I chose independence movements here is that because this is a state building and political question, for me, my initial reaction was to see was the connection between political independence movements and state expansion. So you could absolutely talk about how industrialization drove Europe to find more places. Because yeah, you totally could.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so Wes, what do you think the best way to think of and pick outside evidence is? Okay, so in the pre-writing phase, when you're breaking down the prompt, the reason why I put anticipation next after the prompt analysis is that would be the first place I would go look on either you could look at your Heimler notes. Once you know that this is unit 6 and you know this is indigenous stuff, you could skim down and find where indigenous responses are and see what other indigenous responses you have notes on. I use the little one-page thing from the exam review folder. This is where having some kind of key to quickly find related information, because I didn't have to do anything other than, skim this very first line of unit 6, which is honestly so lucky. And it gave me just this list. Now, does this tell me what any of these things are? No. And that's why you guys still have to prepare and you still have to study this stuff, because I don't want to have to take the time to go Google this crap. I don't want to put indigenous here. Let's do this. Here's the great Google experiment. Let's see. Indigenous responses to state expansion. Look at how many people have already Googled this, probably because they were practicing the prompt. Oh, look, it's Heimler shouting at people. Why does he always look really, I don't know, I don't want to say angry. He just looks very emotional in every thumbnail he drives. Okay, so yeah, so maybe this gets me to this Quizlet, okay? But I suspect it's going to tell me the exact same stuff that we just talked about, right? Okay, look, in Manifest Destiny, which is going to get me to the ghost dance and all that stuff. So cool. Yeah, it's definitely information. This didn't take a huge long time, but yeah, the best way to get to outside evidence for me is to figure out what the topic is, figure out what things are related to the topic, and then once you read the documents, you think of what related stuff do I know as we go through this, like the Ethiopia map. When did we study the Ethiopia painting? we studied that painting, we were talking about the Berlin Conference, right? And the Scramble for Africa. Well, was the Scramble for Africa specifically stated in any of the documents? No. So could I use the Berlin Conference as outside evidence? Probably. Okay, can you use 4 documents for one claim and 1 for the other? Absolutely. You can balance, I mean, any way you want. You would definitely not want to give those 2 arguments equal weight. You would want to, if you're going 4 and 1, what is this telling me? It's telling me that this is really how they responded for the most part. And then occasionally they did this, right? So if you're thinking the first 4 documents are all some form of resistance generally, but the last one shows people that kind of rolled over and, I mean, literally sometimes kissed the feet of the people who came in. Yeah, you can do that, but that's a sign to you that maybe you want to do a counterclaim argument. You want to use the formula, right? Because your thesis is essentially something like, and I'll tell you what, I'll write that version of it too, because I think what you're going to say is essentially that in the course of European expansion during the period 1750 to 1900, some states submitted to European rule and put up with it. However, most states, most indigenous peoples resisted European rule either peacefully or violently, right? And that's that X, however, A plus B equals Y, almost literally done. And so I could totally see how you would get there. So Natasha, that probably addresses yours. Wes, did that help at all on, or do you still feel lost about outside evidence? So Wes, if you haven't already looked at the WHAP index video I made last week, you might want to take a look at that. Or, you can also look at Heimler's how to organize your notes, because I think both of them address getting yourself as prepped as possible to find outside evidence as quickly as possible. And then honestly, I would do everything but outside evidence first. That would be my 8th and 9th points, honestly, unless I find myself with time, because I think you can do sourcing a little bit more easily, because it's still right there for you. Any more questions before we start actually writing this thing? Okay, so let's see. Many European colonies fought for and earned their independence, starting in 1776 with the United States breaking away from Britain. Most American colonies, such as Haiti and the Spanish colonies of South America, okay, I don't want to do more than 2 sentences. Like, obviously, I could get into all this other crap about independence movements. I could talk about industrialization, whatever, but no more than a couple sentences of contextualization, because at this point, I've either given enough specific evidence to meet it or I haven't, right? And so again, when you look at specific names here, I start generally, like if you just did this first sentence, this is not probably good enough. But I mentioned 1776, I say the US breaking away from Britain, I say Haiti, Spanish colonies to South America, right? So that's enough. Now I need to link these facts to the topic of the prompt. Because they lost such valuable sources of natural resources, European countries looked to Africa and Asia as a new source of colonial expansion. Whatever, it's not great. But so you can see I give facts and I link them, okay? And this is a very strong, I think, causation tack to take. And Africa and Asia is where all of my sources, most of my sources are. Yeah, because I can say Hawaii's in the Pacific, right? That's close to Asia. And so now I'm ready for, so there's my contextualization. I wouldn't label these things if we weren't doing this, but I'm just gonna break it up so you guys can see it. All right, so my thesis. Okay, so I varied it a little bit from just saying peacefully or violently there, but there are my two categories: violent resistance or more diplomatic resistance. Okay, so body one, I'm going to start with the first thing in my list, which is violent reactions, because that, I mean, it's just parallel. Okay. So again, I wanna link it directly to my thesis. So my topic sentence is going to be fighting back violently. Okay. All right, so the first document I'm going to use as evidence for this then is going to be document 2, Korea. Okay, so in response to Japanese and European expansion, the Korean people raised an army to whatever, to resist. Okay, so this is doc 2. Similarly, whatever year that was, 1896, and remain thus. Okay. Now, so at this point, if I was going to source either of these, you know, you kind of want to do it with the thing, but didn't really mark either of these as potential places where I'd source. And this is actually probably bad planning on my part, because I really should do that in my first paragraph so that I get as much of this as possible. So in a panic, I may try to source document 3 really fast. And what would I say about document 3? Well, I mean, Nah, don't love it. Gonna skip it. Not gonna waste time. Okay, so for these two places, for these two countries, their violent resistance, at least temporarily. God, why do I always misspell resistance? Okay. So this sentence helps me link the evidence to the prompt. And then I'm going to use my external evidence as the big however. In India, the Sepoy mutiny attempted to violently resist British control, but the rebellion was harshly put down, and it actually increased direct British control over the Indian subcontinent. Okay. Content. Okay. Now, because I don't have sourcing for this, I'm going to move on quickly. So I'm going to go to body 2. Many indigenous peoples attempted to negotiate with European powers, often with limited success. Okay. The Ashanti people of West Africa attempted to deny the British which would, and again, like, this isn't in the document. This is, I mean, this is what I know about history, because the British wound up taking West Africa anyway, right? Even if you don't know the Ashanti people specifically, I mean, you do know that there were like Liberia, Ethiopia, and that was it for who remained independent in Africa, right? Ethiopia won a battle, Liberia because it was a US sponsored state. And so I know that this is not going to be successful in the long term, right? So I can go ahead and say it's going to eventually lead to armed conflict anyway. Okay, there's document 1. The of the Ashanti. Okay, so now I'm sourcing. Okay, so I want to know what part of HIP am I going to use here. Probably audience. So probably going to go intended audience. In writing to the British government, remained polite, even saying that they were pleased to announce. So this is the one place I'm going to quote just because the language matters. So they were pleased to announce that they were telling the British no, which would inevitably anger the British. Okay, so what I've done, you know, so I've got writing to the British government establishes intended audience. I could even be more blatant by saying the audience of document 1 was the British government. And then I'm going to describe the polite tone of the document. And that's my sourcing analysis. I know it seems like gosh, don't I have to say whether they're credible or not? But like, no, you're just analyzing how is the source reflective of historical situation, intended audience, purpose, or point of view. And in this case, they did not write a letter where they were like rude and nasty, because they were writing it to the British government and they wanted to remain. And so this is probably what I might need to say. The Ashanti hoped to remain in the good graces of the British even after saying no. Okay, so that seals the deal and gets my intended audience or my purpose analysis. Okay, in Ethiopia, the Italians wanted to control East Africa, but the Ethiopian ruler fought and won against Italian army. Doc 3. Wait, whoops. What am I doing? I got myself talking about Africa and then I forgot who I was talking about. Okay. The Hawaiian queen also attempted to just peacefully sending a letter to the US government informing them that any expansion into Hawaii was illegal. Okay. So we could do the same thing here and do intended audience or purpose. However, I'm gonna attempt like point of view on this. So I'm going to say from the point of view of Hawaii's rightful ruler, the fact that Hawaiian land was suddenly under someone else's control seemed ridiculous. And she even claimed that the US must have some misapprehension about who rightfully controlled Hawaii. It would be hard for a king or queen to understand someone just taking land without purchasing or invading it. Okay. Now, I've got 4 documents. I've got 2 sourcing. I've got 1 piece of outside evidence. So I do have a little bit of time left. And so, if I'm looking, what was my other outside evidence? The ghost hands. Okay. So I have a pretty fun take on this one, I think. Elsewhere in the United States, Plains Indians peacefully resisted American Manifest Destiny by performing the rituals of the ghost dance, which they hoped would convince the spirits of their ancestors to wipe away the white invaders. Now, that's not technically peaceful, but I mean, the ghost dance itself was peaceful, so it seems like it should apply. However, I'm just going to do it. White people in America were a little freaked out by the ghost dance, and in the end, the slaughter of Little Bighorn ended the ghost dance and Plains Indian resistance rather violently. Okay, and then I'll just take a stab at document 5, which I didn't love, but this is the best place I can put it. If I got credit for it, great. If not, I hope I did okay on the other 4 documents. So I would just say this inability to understand the rights and privileges of indigenous people, which resulted in American, European, and Japanese imperial expansion, can also be seen in the way the Dutch treated Javanese people in modern day Indonesia. Dutch officials would often ask natives to kiss their feet, which was a ritual sign of respect reserved for Javanese elders, and was insulting when targeted at Europeans. This further shows how Europeans thought they could take anything they wanted and didn't need to respect or understand indigenous peoples. Okay, so there's 2 body paragraphs. I hit just about everything. I didn't try to do anything special as far as showing a deeper understanding anywhere in here, but I mean, if you have that in you for this, for the prompt you get, and you want to compare it to other things, like if in this peaceful, we talked about, I don't know, the way the Spanish used Aztec leaders and then enslaved them during their conquest. If we wanted to talk about, you're making connections to the previous thing that was like this, right? Might be one way to show a complex understanding of the topic. If you want to do that, go for it. But I'm keeping things pretty straightforward for this. But I'm hoping that this is enough to get thesis context. Hopefully all 3 of the support and basic evidence points, hopefully both outside evidence points, hopefully sourcing. So in theory, if I hit on all of this, that's a 9, which is more than enough, right? And so there's no need for me to go back and add everything. Between talking to you guys and between writing this thing, this obviously I took more time than I would normally take because we were doing questions, but I would say that we've been going for about 50 minutes. So I'm just over the 45 that I would have had to write this in the first place. And so I'm kind of out of time. I would write a conclusion here to restate my thesis. And so if I did, what would that look like? Man, I want to make sure that my conclusion is as clear as possible, because it is here to back up my original thesis if my original thesis wasn't clear enough or didn't specifically address the question well enough. Okay, so evaluate the extent to which indigenous peoples' reactions to state expansion differed during the period 1750 to 1900. Okay. Indigenous peoples rarely, if ever, just allowed other states to take their land without some form of protest. In some cases, this led to peaceful diplomatic attempts to say no, but in others, this led to direct military, keep doing that, conflict. Okay, and so that to me, I'm hoping that this is my first statement addresses the extent to which, and the reaction is generally saying no in some way, shape, or form. And then I clarified by saying that there were diplomatic attempts, but there were also direct military conflict. Okay, there's a DBQ.